All right. Hi, my name is Brooke Smith, and I am a student at Liberty University, and I am studying my master's in clinical mental health counseling. My presentation today will be on mental health disparities among rural Appalachians. So, a little background on why I chose the topic is I got my bachelor's degree at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, otherwise known as Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. And when I was getting my bachelor's degree there, I noticed that it was very difficult to get off campus providers for any type of healthcare, whether it's an OBGYN or mental health physicians. There was definitely a shortage, and it was difficult to even get appointments at the college campus clinics because of the dire need essentially of college students needing healthcare, as well as especially needing mental health care as more awareness and more education about mental health issues is coming to light, and it's becoming more socially acceptable to obtain mental health treatment. When I would try to get OBGYN appointments or primary care physician appointments, sometimes the wait would be a year to get an initial appointment or, 6 months at the very least. I know my dermatologist, which is a specialty physician, it took about 3 months to get an initial appointment. And I have been living in Appalachia for approximately 5 years. So this population is near and dear to my heart, as I currently still live there working at a local community services board, and I work as a behavioral specialist where I go inside these homes and work inside the community. So I definitely every day am, you know, talking and listening to people of the Appalachian community, and I really enjoy my work that I do with them. And overall, this presentation is to spread awareness not only about the subculture, but also of the dire need for them to be able to obtain healthcare. Social justice is definitely one of the things I am most interested in and most interested in researching. So I want people of all backgrounds and race and cultures to have the same access to healthcare, especially mental health care. All right, and in the slide, a picture of me and the Hokie bird, the mascot of Virginia Tech, and a graduation picture of me when I graduated in 2019. I graduated in 3 years, getting my bachelor's at Virginia Tech. And it's a picture of me in front of Lane Stadium, throwing my graduation cap up. And I am very proud of the fact that I'm a Virginia Tech graduate as well as a Liberty student. And I'm also a huge football fan, so I am glad that both schools that I went to have football teams. And that's why I chose to have Lane Stadium as my background for the graduation picture. Alrighty, so this photo in my poster will show the location of the Appalachian region. It spans along the Appalachian Mountains, and one of the main issues of the mental health disparity in mental health care among rural Appalachians is economic level. Most of the counties you can see, so especially, Eastern Kentucky, as well as Southwestern Virginia, northern parts of West Virginia, and parts of Mississippi. The red is distressed economic level. So 80 counties in rural Appalachia would be considered distressed economically. So that means that most of the citizens living in these counties, they are facing poverty and at-risk factors of mental health that come with low unemployment opportunities, as well as not having, enough food on the table, stuff like that. And the light orange is going to be at-risk communities for distressed economic levels. And the white is transitional. So they're transitioning to kind of a more better and sustainable economic level that's not as concerning. And that's 217. So most of the Appalachian region is in that transitional phase. And the light blue is going to be competitive economic levels, while the dark blue, just 3 counties in the Appalachian region, is going to be considered attainment, which means there's no worry for their economic level, and they have been through the transitional stage and they've been through the competitive stage, and now they're kind of at good normal. All right, and the Appalachian region is comprised of the span of the Appalachian Mountains, which stretch from New York, as you can see here, the southern tip of New York, all the way to northern Mississippi. So the Appalachian Mountains is a pretty vast mountainous region and covers approximately 13 states and stretches over 1,000 miles. The Appalachian region is comprised of the span of the Appalachian Mountains, which stretch from New York to northern Mississippi. Overall, the Appalachian region lacks access to adequate health care. Approximately 8% of the U.S. population, 24.9 million Americans, live in the Appalachian region. The Appalachian region, as defined by the federal government, extends over 1,000 miles into 13 states. Approximately 42% of the region's population is rural, compared with 20% of the national population. During 2011 to 2015, the poverty rate in Appalachia was 17.1%. The national poverty rate is 14.7%. So that's definitely a poverty rate. The rate of uninsured Appalachians under age 65 is 18.2% in rural counties, compared to 14.7% in the region's large metro counties and 12% nationally. Approximately 10% of Appalachians held a bachelor's degree or higher in 2010, compared to 25% of the general United States population. 23% of Appalachians did not complete high school, compared to 13% in the general U.S. population. The Appalachian Regional Commission reported that per 100,000 Appalachian residents compared to national averages, Appalachians comparatively had 12% fewer primary care physicians, 35% fewer mental health providers, 28% fewer specialty physicians, and 26% fewer dentists. Appalachia has a 17% higher rate of suicide than the entire U.S. suicide rate. Comparing Appalachia specifically, rural Appalachians have a 21% higher chance to commit suicide than their urban counterparts. Appalachia also has a higher prevalence of opioid use, as well as increased rates of adverse childhood experiences compared to the rest of the country. Adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs, are significant disturbances in a child's life that impact his or her ability to function in healthy ways. They were initially investigated in 1998 by the Center for Disease Control, Kaiser Permanente, when they studied to examine the link between ACEs and physical and mental health outcomes. ACEs include all forms of child abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual, neglect, physical or emotional, or household dysfunction, divorce, violence, incarceration, substance abuse, or mental illness. Findings of the study indicated that the more ACEs a child experienced, the greater the risk of chronic health conditions, anxiety disorders, low life potential, and even early death. As the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for negative health outcomes. In a study of rural and urban children and adults, the prevalence of ACEs was comparable in rural and urban children and adults. 56.5% of rural adults surveyed reported having ACE exposure. Among those with any ACE history, 25.8% experienced 4 or more ACEs. Thus, people who report having an ACE are at a higher risk of having more than one ACE. Adverse childhood experiences are experienced more often than the rest of the country, which in the Appalachian region, which can be focused in Southwest Virginia, which is a portion of the Appalachian region, and they experience higher rates of unintentional injury in white males, unintentional injury in white females, motor vehicle accidents experienced by both white males and females, homicide rates experienced by white males and white females, firearm homicide experienced by white males and females, and firearm suicide by white males. The coal mining areas of the Appalachian region are especially vulnerable to opioid addiction and substance use. This occurrence can be explained by low education levels, high unemployment rates, and high rates of on-the-job injuries due to the danger of coal mining and other specific jobs that are focused on the region. This region also runs rampant with no oversight. It is important to view the Appalachian region as their own subculture, despite overall looking like a normal American region as their own subculture. The coal mining areas of the Appalachian region are especially vulnerable to opioid addiction and substance use. This occurrence can be explained by low education levels, high unemployment rates, and high rates of on-the-job injuries due to the danger of coal mining and other specific jobs that are focused on the region, such as timber. This region also runs rampant with no oversight. It is important to view the Appalachian region as their own subculture, despite overall looking like a normal American region, through often being of a typical normative American category of race, religion, ancestry, and language. However, looking deeper, not emphasizing the difference of the distinct Appalachian culture leads to unskilled and not adequately trained clinicians. The cultural factors of difficult physical labor employment leading to higher incidences of painful work injuries leads to a culture and region dependent on strong and addicting painkillers, which often leads to intravenous drug use, which leads to blood diseases such as HIV and hepatitis C, continuing the drastic need of medical and economic needs. The painkiller, Oxycontin, was the main way through intravenous drug use addiction within the region. The Appalachian region substance use issue is strong compared to the rest of the country, with a 37% higher rate of overdose than the rate of overdose within the entire country. The highest area of fatal overdose lies within the Appalachian region of Kentucky, which is more than double the rate of the country's overdose rate. From 2006 through 2012, hepatitis C infections were tracked throughout the region, and for those in the region under 30, Central Appalachians experienced a 364% increase in hepatitis C infections. To combat this rise of painkiller dependence and the result of increased bloodborne diseases, it is important for the Appalachian region to be provided with education, treatment, and less addicting and harmful pain relief alternatives for the Appalachian communities. Treatment can be difficult for Appalachians due to the aforementioned lack of healthcare professionals due to inability to access their locations due to travel distance or difficulty getting there, as well as a shortage of health professionals. Even more troubling is financial deterrence, including costs and not being covered by health insurance, as well as lack of training for medical professionals. Those that are treated with substance use often are one of the populations that most often do not have health insurance. Appalachians also report having poor mental health days 14% more than the national average. The number one difficulty that Appalachians report when obtaining healthcare includes the inability to access healthcare due to its location being either too far away or it being too difficult to get there. And this can be explained through the mountainous and isolated terrain that rural Appalachia has. Rural Appalachia specifically has issues with ability to obtain transportation, with 8.4% of rural counties not having the ability to acquire a vehicle, compared to 7.3% within Appalachia as a whole. Appalachia also does not have much access to public transportation as their urban counterparts. Telehealth is a way to breach the divide of transportation to appointments, as well as telehealth being on the rise due to the current coronavirus pandemic. However, using telehealth may not always be feasible for those living in rural Appalachia because it would require access to an electronic device as well as reliable internet connection. In the country, approximately 87.2% of households had a desktop, laptop, smartphone, or tablet, compared to 82.7% of households in Appalachia. When looking at a reliable internet connection, 73% of Appalachians have a subscription, while 78.7% of the entire country has a subscription. The mountainous and isolated terrain, as I mentioned, of the Appalachian region often makes it difficult to obtain reliable internet lines, which is why communities in rural Appalachia often lack access to internet connection. Often, other barriers to treatment include scarcity of mental health clinicians, a historic and cultural distrust of outsiders due to a history of large corporations stripping natural resources such as timber and coal and leaving or being absent within the community in general, which means that they are not building up the community and they do not have contact with community members, as well as cultural values of independence and self-sufficiency. So there is very much a fix-it-yourself attitude in rural Appalachia, and they only go to physicians often when it is a drastic measure, and they like to take care of things themselves. The multitude of components of the lack of access to healthcare can be overwhelming to some, but it also means there are multiple opportunities for dismantling these barriers for Appalachians and for rural communities. Successes and strengths of the Appalachian culture include strong senses of family, self-reliance, love of where they live, strong spiritual beliefs and practices, awareness that life is tough, love of country, a sense of hospitality and equality within the region, culture of wanting to be worthy within the eyes of family, community, their country, and God driving their life actions, and humility being something to strive for and attain. The Appalachian region strives to be hospitable. Another interesting fact and possible strength of the Appalachian culture is the reliance of folk medicine. Folk medicine has historically been important in the treatment of Appalachian communities. This approach was based on available resources and grew out of necessity due to extreme geographic isolation and lack of traditional medical care available to the population for the first century of settlement. Examples of folk medicine that Appalachians use include herbal and homemade remedies, such as ginseng to treat kidney problems, and other alternative herbs for asthma, and golden seal for indigestion. Ethnographic research shows that the use of botanically based home remedies are being replaced by items occurring around the home, such as gasoline, kerosene, ashes, stove soot, sulfur, and to an even greater degree, commercial products are commonly reverted to for many ordinary health concerns, such as aspirin, Vicks, Listerine, Vaseline, Doan's kidney pills, etc. These practices are still quite important because healthcare, which is more readily available, is often too expensive for the large uninsured population. Prescription drugs are often out of reach, and professional healthcare is usually only sought in more extreme situations, such as extreme workplace injuries within these coal mining towns. And a call to action for these communities is there's a need for adequate training for those working with the rural Appalachian population. And there's a need for increased mental health awareness as well as increased knowledge regarding mental health resources for Appalachian communities. An increased need for public transportation for those living in rural Appalachia to be able to get to appointments. And most rural Appalachians, there's a high rate of not being able to have a reliable form of transportation, including access to a vehicle. Increase recruitment and building of mental health facilities by creating incentives such as grants to practice within these communities. And below is my references and citations, and that's the end of my presentation, and I hope you guys have a wonderful conference. And I'm glad I have been given the opportunity to highlight this wonderful population and the importance of awareness of this population and the help that they need in obtaining their rightful health care, because everyone has a right to health care, especially mental health care.